A turning point, according to the Oxford Dictionary, means a time at which a decisive change in a situation occurs. Turning points in history are rare and influential. Examples can be huge, such as the Civil Wars, the Industrial Revolution, and time periods such as the Renaissance. However, a turning point may appear to be small, yet impactful, like a human chain, just like the Baltic Way, made in 1989 on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. 1 to 2 million people from the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, held hands and came together to form a chain spanning 600 kilometers, linking the capitals of these nations, lasting 15 minutes and was organized over a period of 6 weeks. In Baltic history, the Baltic Way is a powerful turning point that turned around the lives of many.
The Baltics protested because of the Molotov Pact, an alliance between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, led by Joseph Stalin, and Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler on the 23rd of August 1939. This pact contained public and secretive sections. The public side stated that the USSR and Germany would aid each other. The secretive side divided Eastern Europe between the powers, including the Baltics. The Germans gained much of Poland and small parts of Lithuania, while the Soviets gained Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, and parts of Poland, and the rest of Lithuania. This showed the Soviets' clear interest in the Baltics, as both of them and the Germans wanted to split the countries between them. The Soviets slowly built up pressure on the Baltics by rigging the elections in order to oppose Soviets in leadership, which made the people's support aiming towards the Soviets. The Soviets invaded the Baltic nations, after delivering them an ultimatum on June 14, 1940. After taking the lands, they were locked in a state of war, switching hands from Soviet to German. Then the Soviets fought back, taking the Baltics back and installing the former grip upon them, claiming to denazify them, but really installing harsh measures upon them. By the end of World War II, the Soviets had full control, and the Baltics wanted revenge.
Big impact obviously was that immediately the Russians did invade. They came to the border and they basically said, you have to accept our military base agreements, which brought in troop strengths into the and they basically said, if you don't, we will invade immediately. So basically, they forced invasion, and all three of those countries, which had been very active democracies, immediately the democracies were eliminated, and what started was massive pogroms, massive deportations of anybody who was perceived as not needed for the Soviet regime, for the communist regime, and massive deportations. There was massive bloodshed. About all told, in the year that the Soviets invaded, about 10% of Latvia, for instance, was either deported or outright murdered.
Mass deportations occurred in the Baltic region and other conquered lands of the Soviets. As the new ruler, the Soviets wanted to exercise their power so they could show that they were the overlords. Between the night of June 13, 1941 and June 22nd, the Baltics lost around 130,000 people, who were either jailed or deported. This happened to many people in the Baltics, such as Erika Palmapu. Erika Palmapu was transported with her 4 siblings and mother to the Kirov Oblast. This was known as the June deportations, and through 1940 to 1941, over 170,000 Baltic people were jailed or deported. The next few years would be a terrible time for the Baltics. From 1946 to 1953, over 540,000 people were either deported, killed, or displaced because of German occupation. The deportations and brutal suppression to protests had brought down the ethnicity of Baltic people, so much to a point where Russians became their highest ethnicity. This had a dramatic effect because patriotism for their country had ceased to exist, and support was gone. After the deportations, the Russians let them be, but only as crippled nations who could not fight back for many decades. The Baltic people would be wiped off the map until a turning point happened, the Baltic Way.
The Baltic states under the Soviet Union faced significant suffering and oppression due to Soviet domination. The Popular Front of Latvia, Lithuanian Sąjūdis, and the Estonian Ravens launched the independence campaign in 1989. The International Baltic Council was established in 1989 to organize the Baltic Way, a 600-kilometer human chain from Vilnius to Riga to Tallinn, requiring 400,000 people, with over 100,000 from each Baltic state needed. It was difficult to organize the Baltic Way, so it was instructed over radio, and sections were assigned to small independence groups to make sure the Baltic Way went smoothly. Organized on the 23rd of August, 1989 at 7 p.m. Eastern European Time for 15 minutes, the Baltic Way was a significant turning point in the history of the Baltic states.
I remember, that, my family just decided, yes, we're gonna, be in this particular point. We actually stood in Riga on one of the bridges, and I remember going to that. We were going to be there half an hour before 7 p.m. when the chain was formed. And I remember going there and thinking, wow, all these national flags and these symbols that we've been prohibited to use, for so many years now, everybody's just freely going and using them. So there's definitely a fear that we're doing something that's prohibited. But at the same time, it was excitement that, we're all united and we're doing this together as a nation.
It prioritized human rights and demonstrated to Moscow an act of solidarity and independence. This was preceded by protests against Russia, such as the TV tower protests in Vilnius, and these protests eventually led to the Declaration of Independence for the Baltic states. Lithuania seceded from the USSR on the 11th of March, 1990. However, the Russians were unsatisfied and started to impose embargoes and put troops around the Baltics. As a sign to other Soviet republics, Estonia and Latvia declared their independence on the 20th and 21st of August 1991 to support Lithuania during the government squabbles, such as when communist hardliners briefly took the USSR. The Baltics eventually leaned towards the West to combat their former owners' ideals after the collapse of the USSR on Christmas Day 1991 by joining NATO, the West Defense Organization, and the EU, the European Trade Organization, on the 29th of March and the 1st of May 2004, respectively. The Baltic Way marked a significant turning point in the history of the Baltic states and the struggle for independence.
Although we live in a new era of global politics, we cannot forget about the sacrifices made in order to change history. The Baltic Way was a turning point delivered by the Baltic people that symbolized a new dawn of protest, influencing people all around the world. It brought people together, and they collectively stood up to the acts of the Soviets, trying to correct the faults made in history. As beacons of democracy, the people's decision was an integral part of Baltic culture. The Baltic Way was a turning point that brought people together with unity, and with unity brought in